Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thanks. Yourself?
I'm doing all right. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, you're coming through nice and clear.
Awesome.
Let me. Okay, all features. Yeah, this is the demo. Just want everyone to be aware that I am just playing the demo. Maybe before we even get into the questions. Well, first of all, hello and welcome to the stream. Um, can you talk a little bit about your role in this project and maybe a bit of a background on the development?
Sure, yeah. So I'm the lead designer of the game and one of the co-founders of my studio, Finite Reflection Studios. I think I saw Cookie in the chat of your stream earlier. He's one of my other co-founders and developers. We started this game for the GMTK Game Jam 2020 was the original version of the game. And it did pretty well, much better than any of our previous jam attempts. So we just kind of felt like, hey, you know what? Let's just keep working on this, and so we did. And it turned, it changed from a small jam game with like a single level into a lot of levels with a whole story, and yeah, and then now we launched it.
Nice. I'm really glad to hear anytime a game jam project can sort of come together like that. And um, yeah, because I feel like sometimes a jam game is well received and people will make like a little post jam version, but it's really exciting to see that you like took it all the way and got it through to a Steam release.
Yeah, and it's something that we really enjoy doing it thus far. Two out of the three games that our studio has published, self-published, have been from jams. And who knows, maybe the next one will be as well. We haven't decided yet.
Nice. So the maybe you can just give a quick rundown of what we're going to see in the demo and how that differs from the release version.
Sure, yeah. So the demo is basically the first quarter of the game. Basically, the game is split into four chapters or four zones.
Hmm.
And so the first zone is the grassland zone. It has some of the most, beginner-friendly mechanics and introduces you to the game and introduces you to the narrative and kind of ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, which I was pretty happy with in terms of creating intrigue and making players want to check out the full game. And so there's the only sort of like ongoing feature that's intentionally left out from the demo is the kind of hidden collectible element of the game where you find and rescue lovebirds that have been caged across
Hmm.
every tower. So those are taken out for the demo, but other than that, it's basically literally just the first quarter of the game, and the save carries over too.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's always great when you can get the sort of continue on your progress from like without having to replay a section. Um, all right. Uh, so what is the I guess what would you say is the most benefit to you if people grab the version on itch.io or off of Steam?
Honestly, either, if anyone does get the game on Steam, I always try to urge people to leave honest reviews because reviews and the number of reviews, positive or negative, help just sort of create interest and help people know whether or not this game is a match for them. But also, getting it on itch usually means that we get a larger percentage of the rev share there. So, yeah, whatever suits the preference of the customer at the end of the day.
Nice. Well, I had a feeling that the you get a slightly larger revenue share from itch.io, which is why I thought it would be nice to steer people that way. But yeah, I would definitely encourage everyone to, you know, check the game out and consider grabbing it on at least one of the two platforms. Of course, you've got this entire demo available here on the itch.io page. Is it available on Steam as well?
Yeah, you can play the demo both on itch and Steam, whichever one you prefer.
Okay, I think that when I was looking at the Steam page, I feel like itch.io is a little bit more generous with the layout and allows you to put it a bit more front and center because you had the demo download available right here on, and then yeah, Steam also has it front and center right there. I'm just blind. Okay. Cool. Does it matter if people, like, if someone were to grab the itch.io demo, does the Steam, like, does the save carry over if they buy it on Steam then, or does that mess with things?
And I think it does, actually, now that you mention it. It should. We're not... Honestly, the Cookie in chat might be the better person to answer that one, so I'm sure he's listening, and if he hears this, you should say so in chat, Eric.
Yeah, I can imagine because I think Steam writes to its own like local data. Anyway, if you save file should be the same for all platforms. Okay, well that's perfect. That's excellent. So whichever platform you feel like you want to grab the file from for the sake of the demo, then you can give it a shot. I will just once again repost the link to both the itch.io and Steam versions of the game. And the game did release just last week. So how has the first week been since release?
It's been pretty good. You know, on Steam we're sitting at 26 positive reviews, like 100% positive reviews, which is like huge. I couldn't have asked for better, I guess, critical reception. Some of the feedback that we've gotten have been pretty mild, like, oh, hey, this part was a little too tough, or that part had a small bug here or there, compared to, our experience with some of our previous games where, like, oh, like there was something structurally missing, or there was like a major thing that prevented you from beating the game. But so far it's been good, and for me, the biggest badge of honor that I'm wearing as someone who is really responsible for the narrative in this game, is seeing some streamers crying at some of the story beats of the game, which made me feel really good that the story really resonated with them and that we were able to reach such high emotional stakes in the game.
Nice, that's wonderful. I love it when like anytime you've created like a work of art, a story, something that really reaches people. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. Well, I'm just reading through the story. Well, I must admit, I'm kind of like skimming the story while also trying to focus on what we're talking about. But yeah, so there we go. I just caught the sort of fun little reference to like, oh, Prince must be in another tower. Was that a deliberate reference to Princess in the Castle?
Definitely. I can't help myself. I'm a very like referential writer, I guess, if that's a word. Late in the game, there's also a subtle Lord of the Rings reference as well. I can't help but reference media that I enjoy throughout my writing.
Nice.
But yeah, you can see here throughout the writing that I tried to sort of strike this kind of all ages friendly writing style where, we throughout the game explore a lot of different themes and a lot of different topics, some of which you won't often see in a more kid-friendly game, but I think are just as important to talk about in a kid-friendly game. And so I'm always trying to find this nice balance between keeping it lighthearted, but also, touching on some heavier themes.
Yeah, I can absolutely appreciate that. I always like it when a game doesn't talk down to kids. Like it makes it kid friendly. Like a lot of my favorite media is like that. Like if I'm thinking about something like The Iron Giant or Avatar: The Last Airbender, those feel like media that could be enjoyed by anyone of any age, but it doesn't talk down to the kids that are going to be engaging with it and watching it, and it helps expose them to some, important life lessons, I think.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned Avatar: Last Airbender. That's one of my favorite shows of all time. Our cats are actually named Zuko and Azula.
That's adorable. Did the writing of Avatar have any kind of influence? Oh, I guess so. Who was responsible for the writing on this project?
So I kind of took the lead on the narrative. I say lead because Cookie, who's Eric, I don't know if he cares if I'm calling him by his first name. I mean, he's all over social media as well, but he was kind of like my editor. He was kind of coming in afterwards and cleaning up bits and pieces here and there and helping, basically being my soundboard for bouncing ideas off of, which has been really nice. But for the most part, I took the lead on the narrative as an idea that I had, a story that I felt like I really wanted to tell. If you weren't able to tell from the Steam page or the itch page, there's a very strong sort of queer representation element to this story, and the obvious, like, subversion of the princess locked in the castle trope. Um, I love media and art that subverts and takes expectations and turns them on their heads, and that's kind of the crux of what we did here with the narrative. And yeah, I'd say that Avatar: The Last Airbender and Steven Universe are two examples of media that I think greatly affected my writing on this project in particular, because both are great examples of media that some people would say, oh, that's just a kids show, but then when you actually like watch it and pay attention to what they're talking about, you'll realize they're talking about some pretty serious stuff, some stuff that even like adult-oriented shows don't always cover with such tact and care.
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly that. Sort of like, just because they cover it doesn't mean they actually cover it with any sort of like, oh, they mention it, but they don't actually, they just kind of skirt the surface of it and use it for drama purposes, but they don't actually care to give it its due or say it right. So it is kind of incredible when these quote unquote kids shows do better than the shows that are supposed to be directed at a more mature audience. So I'm glad that that was an influence on the writing, and I'm already enjoying what I'm seeing so far. Again, I wish I could give it more of my focus, but
Thank you.
um, cool. So as we're getting through the game here, I know that basically what I'm seeing right now is because the original Jam game was sort of, was it like you could climb infinitely? Was that the idea?
The original Jam game, no, it was just like a single level and very I don't want to say it was incomplete. It definitely wasn't what we had intended to have by the end of the game. I think at some point we thought we were going to try and make it an endless tower climbing thing, but then we still wanted to have a goal, and we just ended up finishing what we could. At the end of the day, what we ended up with was just a core mechanic of cutting flowers that grew procedural vines that spawned procedural leaves that you could spring off of to throw yourself to the top of the tower. That was all we really had at the end of the jam, and it was at that point that we had to figure out, how do we want to turn this into a full game? Do we want it to be an endless type, or do we want separate towers? And we wanted to go the separate towers because that allowed me and Eric and Cookie to do more sort of hand designed levels, and levels where we got to like place down specific obstacles, as you'll see in this level right here, specific obstacles that prevent you from climbing up too easily.
Yeah, right. Because it was during the original 2020 Jam when I tried this out, so I couldn't remember if it was maybe it felt endless because I wasn't very good at it and couldn't get the way to the top, or maybe I did. I don't remember exactly. But so other than the I guess building the game out into a campaign, like we saw a lot of cool stuff in that original trailer for the game. Do you want to talk a little bit about the process of like transitioning from the Jam project over to the production project? Like, how much were you able to keep, and how much did you have to just like scrap and rebuild?
It's funny that you mentioned you felt like the game was endless because maybe you weren't able to get to the top, which would have been completely fair because I recently went back and replayed the Jam version just to refresh my memory on it, and I forgot just how hard it was to control the character in that. The controls were very floaty and a little bit chaotic. And so immediately after the jam, one of the first things that we spent a lot of time refining was just the core move set, because that's obviously, the core of any platformer, is making sure that your core move set is very tight, responsive, and predictable, so that whenever you press a button to jump, it's going to take you exactly where you want it to go and not have any unexpected consequences. But once we had that nailed down, which I can't remember exactly how long it took us. I want to say it took us at least, I don't know, 2 or 3 months just to get that one element done. And we continued to tweak on it throughout development up until the last minute. Along with that, kind of tied to the character's movement system, we also had to refine the system that spawns these leaves and spawns these flowers. Because originally we had a system that was very constrained. It had 0 constraints on it, wherein vines and leaves would just kind of spawn wherever the heck they pleased. And so we had to add a lot of rules and a lot of systems to try and make it a little bit more predictable. We still really enjoyed the kind of unpredictable, chaotic nature that you had to sort of react in the moment. But that was just not conducive to good gameplay at the end of the day. So we had to find a nice middle ground there, which I think we did. And once we kind of had those elements down, I started cracking away at creating new environments with unique mechanics to match those environments, as well as, of course, writing the story and doing all these animations for all these characters that you meet along the way.
Yeah, so we've met the gardener and the knight so far. Do you want to talk about some of the other characters you're going to encounter later in the story?
Yeah, it's not too many, but so there's the gardener and there's the knight. The knight is obviously from what you've seen so far is the uh, begrudging. Well, yeah, you haven't really gotten there yet, but she ends up being an ally. She's a little bit torn right now in the story. Later on, you meet the pirate, who is just kind of chaotic and wonderful in their own way. Obviously, you meet the evil magician, who is the primary antagonist, and then you meet the prince as well. And you'll actually meet the prince during the demo, because one of the things that I really wanted to do with this that is absent when you normally have the princess is in another castle trope, is that oftentimes, you know, the person you're rescuing, the princess, is just like this person that you meet at the very end of the game and has no personality whatsoever, and they exist only to be rescued. But I really wanted to try and have a character who you are trying to rescue, but you also meet throughout the story so that they have some kind of personality and they have a role to play besides just being rescued.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate that. Like, and it's a similar situation with anytime you have like a villain in a story. I find very often uh, they just are like the sort of the unnamed big bad, and you don't really get a chance to see what makes them interesting, what makes them a compelling force of antagonism towards the player. So, was that something that you were able to like? Am I going to encounter the magician that's been creating all these towers?
Actually, yeah, and the magician plays a very big role in the story, and there's a lot to unpack when it comes to the magician. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes the antagonist is often more interesting than the protagonist in terms of what you can explore with what makes them antagonizing. Why are they so opposed to the protagonist's goals? And so I had a lot of fun writing the magician and trying to come up with a compelling reason for them to be who they are and to constantly be at odds with you, based partially on just, you know, some of... I kind of just sort of like dug deep into my past and how I feel like I've grown as a person, and kind of like pulled up some feelings of like when I was a little bit less mature and when I was a little bit more, you know, when I was younger and still had a lot to learn. I was like, what was I like back then, and how can I basically turn that into a villain who has maybe possibly an opportunity to grow. Um, and yeah, I think he's a really fun villain.
Nice. Do we get to see the villain in the demo, or is that more of a like later in the game thing?
Yeah, you'll see the villain and the prince on the last level of the demo.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm already sort of forgetting the fact that this game has other mechanics, like, oh look, you can slow down by carving your shears into the wall, and you had the prompt that I ignored for the entirety of the last level, which was to like sort of slide along the ground here. But I gotta say, like, even just bouncing around in the levels, I can already tell that the month's worth of effort really show. I'm getting a good feeling for the controls for the character. It feels very nice and fluid. Definitely finding it much easier to make progress than the jam version, which I did, as I said, it was quite a while ago, but
Yeah, no, that's been such a huge learning for us, is figuring out how to create controls that feel responsive and consistent. It
Mhm.
wasn't honestly. I think we found like a bug in our code like a month or two ago prior to launch where sometimes the velocity that you get coming out of cutting a flower would vary depending on like what you did prior. And when we fixed that, and it was such a minor bug when you really looked at what was wrong, but when we fixed that and we played it and we were like, wow, that made a big difference in just being able to like quickly scale towers and not miss jumps.
Nice. Yeah, and I also saw that there was some emphasis on the speed running of the game. Have you had much engagement in the sort of like speed running, any like world record attempts so far?
Yeah, we haven't had anyone attempt to do a speedrun of the whole game. I'm kind of worried that the game as a whole might be a little bit long for people to get to into that, but we do have the challenges system, which is actually also in the demo if you go back to the main
Hmm.
menu, but um, the challenge system has been nice for people interested in speedrunning because we have a small speedrunning community in our Discord that are competing right now for our launch competition that we are doing, and yeah, so like we're giving away a physical flower painting, which are being actually used in game for the achievements to the top three speedrunners who play the specific speedrun level that we have mentioned in the challenges mode. And that one, it's nice because it times you in game. It shows you your time, and you don't have to like time it yourself. And that slide mechanic that you mentioned earlier was added like a month or two before release because we wanted just a little bit more higher level tech for speedrunners to mess with, but is not at all required to beat the game at any point.
Yeah, gotcha. I know that I ask and I sort of bring it up because, well, I I definitely have a appreciation for the speedrunning community. Not that I'd ever consider myself good enough to do a speedrun myself. Um, I don't know. You said that the game would be like too long to speedrun. Uh, could you give like a would you say is the average amount of time for the campaign?
The average amount of time for the campaign, I'd say, would be somewhere between 3 hours if you're like familiar with platformers and you're already decent at them, upwards of 4 hours if you're not, to account for the difficulty scale.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. I mean, I know what you mean. Like that's definitely on the sort of long side of some of the speedruns, but I don't know. I guess there aren't really opportunity for like crazy skips as much as there is just a lot of opportunity for well executed technical precision, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing is like because the game is so sequential and so like locked down in terms of the order of levels that you go through, I'd
Hmm.
be really impressed if someone could figure out a way to skip an entire level. I obviously as soon as I say it's not possible, someone will figure it out, but from my perspective, it doesn't seem possible to skip an entire level, which means at the end of the day, you're most likely only going to be able to just, you know, try and beat each level as fast as possible, which generally means early levels will take you like at the fastest level will take you a minute to beat, I think. Some of the later levels, the levels get pretty long at the late game. So yeah, again, point being, it would take a while to beat it. It would take a lot of dedication to get there. And as much as our small and tight speedrun community is doing such a good job of speedrunning specific levels, I don't know if anyone on that speedrunning community is keen on doing the whole game. At least not yet.
It's a bit of a gauntlet to be sure, but
Yeah.
give it time. I'm certain. We have we have summoned Sam in the chat here who has done some well, let's say challenge runs. Actually, I don't remember, Sam, if you did a speed run of Worlds Within Worlds, but I know that you have the sort of world record in Allocate at this moment. Um, so I don't know if you'd be interested in taking on that challenge, but it sounds like quite a serious one.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll definitely. I want to some point soon create page for the game on speedrun.com to allow people to submit their runs there. Haven't gotten around to it yet because I think to create that page I have to submit a full game run, which I still need to do and record myself.
Yeah, I got it. Um, oh, okay, right. So yeah, you got down to 7 minutes in Worlds Within Worlds, and then um, these windmills. Are these specifically meant to sort of gate the level into discrete chunks so that if you fall, you just sort of land on this midway point?
Actually, yeah, it's interesting that you say that. That was the original game design intent, because I was starting to feel like the levels were feeling a little bit too, I don't know, like continuous, and I wanted there to be some way to break it apart, and so I had this cool visual idea of there being a literal gap, a magical gap in the tower, and then we needed a mechanic to let you cross that gap, and I thought, hey, windmills look kind of pretty when they're on big towers, so let's put some of those on. But I think as you get deeper into the game, they serve different purposes, but generally, yeah, they are a form of just gate. And as you can see here, they're tied to basically key mechanics, gate and key mechanics, having to hit the button to turn them on to cross.
Yeah, so I guess when you were shifting from the jam version of the game to the production version of the game, what was the brainstorming session like to come up with like new mechanics and ideas? Like, could you give me like a ballpark of, let's say, the quantity of ideas that you came up with, even if you didn't end up implementing all of them? I'm just curious what that session was like.
Yeah, so Cookie and I spent a lot of time trying to come up with mechanics that would help keep the gameplay fresh throughout, and I'm really proud of the fact that we were able to do so many mechanics kind of packed into just 7 levels per 4 zones, 28 levels total. But through each of those 28 levels, there is rarely I don't think there's a single level where like you just recycle mechanics from a previous level. There's always just like a new mechanic to discover. Because that's just my game design preference. I prefer to keep things packed and dense, as opposed to like drawing things out for the sake of duration. I mean, one of the things that instantly ruled out a lot of the ideas that we had was the fact that a fun little behind the curtain thing here about the game implementation is that the player is never moving left or right. The world is rotating behind the player. That's how it all implemented.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is a couple of things. One, the game is technically using 2D physics, which also meant that means that when things go a little bit to your left, a little bit to your right, their colliders no longer exist in the way that we implemented things, which means that we can't have any mechanics that are simulating physics away from you, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a surprisingly large technical hurdle / drawback. We found a couple of cheats to help make some later mechanics work in spite of that limitation. But aside from that, a lot of our coolest ideas got axed because of that technical limitation. Beyond that, it was just a matter of trying to find mechanics that played interestingly with the core mechanic that you currently are, experiencing of cutting flowers and jumping off leaves. Like one of the ideas that we had for the second zone of the game that we implemented is the idea of coconuts and seesaws, because it came from this core idea of, well, you're primarily running around with your shears and you're cutting these flowers and jumping off leaves. What if there was a mechanic that required you to hold something else for some reason, and while you're holding that something else, you can't use your shears until you put that something else down? And how can we design interesting levels around that concept? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an idea that fundamentally changes the mode of play so that you're not just doing the same thing constantly. You've got to take something else into consideration and sort of adapt on the fly.
Exactly. That results in a lot of different interesting pieces of gameplay. and other things that continue to just sort of modify and affect the way that you climb the towers. At the penultimate zone of the game, we have wind tunnels that are constantly affecting your velocity and physics a little bit, causing you to reconsider the arc of your jump depending on the strength of the wind that you're inside of. So stuff like that just help bring a little bit more depth to the core gameplay as you get deeper into the game.
Nice. I even like as I was playing there, I sort of realized like, oh, I don't actually have to activate this windmill. I can just use the velocity and sort of auto seek nature of the shears to skip past this. And I'm certain that you've got a lot of moments like that that are intentional as part of the level design.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of points where we kind of let the mechanics allow for what I've seen some people say like, "Ooh, I found a cheat." I'm just like, yeah, sure, it may feel like a cheat, but like, the mechanics allow for it, and we know it's possible, so it's technically not a cheat. But if it feels like a cheat and you feel like you did something really smart, that's good. That's a nice player experience to have.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's always fun to feel like you outsmarted the developer, even though 9 times out of 10 it is usually intentional. Like you kind of have some serious flaws in the game itself for that sort of thing to not be intentional. Oops.
Right,
Oops.
yeah.
Oops. Oops. All right. Well, I'm sort of messing myself up here, but so the game was built in Unity, right? And
Yes.
the one of the things I'd like to ask is if you can recommend a clever shortcut or a hack within the engine that you would recommend to others.
Trying to think of some specific ones that we may have used for this, and Cookie and Chat, if you have any thoughts as well. We like to separate our roles in terms of, I usually say that I'm the lead designer, he's the lead developer, because he usually has the most to say when it comes to actual like coding development and stuff. But I mean, for this, because the game uses 2D colliders, I was often toggling between editing levels in 3D and editing levels in 2D to take a look at the colliders and make sure that they are being placed correctly. I found that just the fact that the keyboard shortcut pressing the number key 2 was a nice button to just like quickly tap and quickly translate the camera between 3D and 2D to make sure that all the colliders are where I need them to be, as well as using the orthographic camera mode. If you select the, I'm trying to figure out like how to describe where this button is, but in the top right corner of your scene view, where you have the axes that tell you, the orientation of the camera, underneath that is a often pretty hard to see button that shows you 3 lines converging on a point, and I think it might say perspective next to it. But if you click it, it changes your perspective on the scene view camera from perspective to orthographic, and lets you better align your elements in 2D, which is really nice.
Nice. Yeah, I'm gonna just fire up a Unity project here real quick so I can point it out. If anyone has any questions in chat, please do send them along. Always a hard question. If you plan on doing localization, do it from the beginning. Localize the game in English, and it makes the process a lot easier when you actually need it. Absolutely. That's a great tip from Cookie, that you don't want to be adding localization down the line.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that Cookie is a big proponent for throughout development. He's always saying like, oh hey, like make sure that you got localization tags on that text component and stuff. Yeah, so right now I see on your
tiny little... Right,
yeah, so that 2D
here.
button that you just pressed, you can hit 2 to quickly hit that instead of having to click that button up there. And then that's the button, yeah, on stream, I see.
I didn't even realize that was a button. Oh,
yep,
wow.
right?
No kidding.
You don't even realize it's a button, and then when you hit it, you're like, oh, cool, this is very useful.
Absolutely. Well, it would be great if I could see the level from the other side, but anyway. Yeah, that's neat. I had no idea. And then, of course, when it's in the isometric view, it doesn't have, or when it's in the 2D view, it doesn't have...
right.
Yeah, also did not realize that you can just press 2 to toggle between 2D and 3D mode. That is definitely a very useful shortcut.
It's kind of a specific shortcut. I don't know how often people need to toggle between 2D and 3D unless you're making a specifically 2.5D game like I am.
Actually, I'd say that when you're toggling between working on a 3D game and working on UI, you're probably doing it
Oh,
pretty
that's
often.
true. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I didn't think about that.
How much more is there to the demo here?
There are 7 levels, so that last tower you see is the last level of this demo.
Okay, cool. I think we're coming up at a pretty good time for. Um, I don't know. Are there any other points that you'd like to touch on before we end up wrapping things up here?
Um, I'm not sure really. Honestly, I'll say the only thing I think we haven't really talked about is the art style,
Yeah.
which is basically just kind of an evolution of an art style that I've been really enjoying focusing on. Also, I see a question in your chat. How many people made this game? 4 people. 2 people working on the active development, like the coding and the design, and then 1 person doing the sound design, 1 person doing sort of art external to the game, kind of like the achievement paintings and our website and our marketing materials.
Nice.
And Burrito Eclair asked a question that I was in the middle of answering before they asked it, so perfect. Yeah, so I've been really interested in the intersection of pixel art and 3D. I just think that like they are 2 kind of inherently divergent art styles or aesthetics, and I really want to see like where all they can converge in interesting ways. And so that was kind of like the inspiration for the art style that you see here, where the player is a 2D sprite, and all the other characters that you meet are all 2D sprites. But basically everything else in the game is entirely 3D, all 3D models. What we did though is on the camera is rendering the game at a lower resolution and is using a point filter so that it gets those chunky pixels. I had to place the player at a very specific distance from the camera to ensure that they don't get pixelated incorrectly, which was a much bigger challenge than I want to admit. And there are some levels where you can see it, where you can see the effect break essentially because the character will, maybe their eye will be a little bit bigger than it's supposed to be, or their smile might look a little bit crooked because of this pixelation effect breaking slightly. And it was an interesting challenge to try to get the player to not feel like a 2D image that's being pasted on top of a 3D background. And one of the subtle touches that I'm really proud of implementing here is a fairly subtle shader on the player that highlights either the left or the right edge of his player sprite, depending on what side of the tower you're on. And that also changes with the lighting systems. So the lighting... Burrito Eclair is just asking questions like as I'm answering them. That's really crazy. The lighting is just using regular like Unity 3D lighting, and it's the only part about it where I'm doing any bit of sort of black magic or whatever is when I am doing the lighting on the player, because that one is basically just a shader which I'm feeding in a value between -1 and 1, and it just kind of gives the player sprite a little bit of lighting on one edge or the other edge, and kind of makes them feel just a little bit more three-dimensional and mesh with the three-dimensional art in the background. And you can also see I hand-painted some normal maps on the brick texture back there, which helps add a little bit more texture to the brick as it's being lit at a glancing angle. So all those tiny little touches were just through the process of the about year and a half that we spent working on this game to try and make it all mesh together nicely.
Nice. All right, well, that's perfect timing because I just managed to finish
Nice.
the last level of the demo as well. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining me on the stream here today. I think this has been really fun discussion. And obviously, I'm going to repost a link to the game, the Steam, the itch.io page, and anything else I can paste.
Those should be great. I think, yeah, if people are interested in the game, really appreciate if they can buy it either on Steam or itch. And if you do get it on Steam, we really appreciate honest reviews to help, grow our audience and let people know that our game exists and that we worked very hard on it.
All right, so let's conclude the story here. And it turns out. Hey! Can't believe it's really you. Oh, come on! Say it! No! Oh no! No, of course, it couldn't have been that easy. Here we have our villain.
A mild influence from Job from Arrested Development, for those of you who know that show.
I like the animation of the character portrait there.
Thank you.
Ooh, fancy. Very fancy.
A lot of his magic is themed around lightning and sort of raw energy power, and it just gets more and more intense though as you get deeper into the game. So all these shaders and effects that I wrote for the magician were a lot of fun.
Nice.
But we need to update that. It still says it will launch in 2021.
Well, I think you've had your hands full with the actual release itself.
Yeah.
Ooh, fancy. Get to a little sneak peek at the different environments. Although, I think anyone who's getting the demo would already see that the game's released, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Hello, crabs. So those are straight up low poly 3D crab models. All right. How did you do, by the way, in terms of wish lists on Steam?
I think we did okay. It's no secret that indies have to work very hard to get wish lists on Steam, but we tried to make and release this game kind of as quickly as we could, and that comes with its benefits and its detriments. One of the detriments is the fact that it means we don't have as much time to garner wish lists as most games on Steam do, because I think our Steam page was really only up for about not very long, honestly. Maybe a year at most, maybe less, probably less.
Yeah, I know that wish lists have become like a frighteningly important metric when it comes to releasing a game. So, yeah, just do you feel like you would have wanted more time if you could have had it?
I don't think we needed more time developing the game. I think it's possible, and there's no way to know. We can't enter an alternate timeline where we made a different decision, but it's possible that if we had just sat on the game longer, it might have gotten more wish lists and gotten more sales on day one. But it's also possible that if we did that people would have lost interest and then forgotten about the game. But You
Oh,
never know.
it's a very difficult balance to strike. But
Hmm.
yeah, well, I wish you the best of luck. I love the fact that the controls are sort of like also updating on the fly depending on what I'm uh, touching as the input most recently.
Highly recommend Rewired for anyone looking to do multiple controller support.
Excellent. Good to know. Yeah, well, I did. I was playing this whole time with an actual controller plugged in, but and yeah, because I saw the recommendations, like try it out with a controller. Um, anyway, so as I was saying, yes, thank you so much for joining me on the call today. Thank you, Cookie, as well, for offering some quick answers in chat. And yeah, best of luck on the project. And everyone who has been watching, please do go check out the game, try out the demo yourself. You got nothing to lose. It's a fun time. And yeah, I guess we'll wrap things up there. Thanks again. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, bye bye.
Bye.